The NBA trade deadline is coming closer and closer as we go. So today, we're pretty much just going to go through a couple guys that we need to talk about, a couple teams that we need to keep in mind of. These players going to possibly how one trade could make a domino to another one, how one trade can impact another one, or even impact the team's season. So let's just go right to the first one. The biggest piece maybe in this trade deadline is Jeremy Grant. This guy is maybe the best piece in the deadline just for one reason and one reason only. He is so valuable, but at the same time, he is asking for so much. He wants a contract extension, and the Pistons are pretty much trying to get the Nikola Vucevic trade that the Bulls pulled off at the last trade deadline, which was 2 first-rounders and Wendell Carter. Pretty much it'll be 2 first-rounders and a prominent player of value that would help the Pistons in a couple of years. So I put up a list of teams here. I put the Lakers, Bulls, and Jazz. All teams who have been mentioned and make a lot of sense. I think if he gets dealt to one of those teams, I think it'll be the Utah Jazz. Maybe we see some kind of Joe Ingles will probably include it in the trade as he's injured. The Bulls could just let him go in free agency the next season, or the Pistons could let him go in free agency the next season. So it makes a lot of sense making that kind of a trade. They'll definitely give up the first rounders to get some competition in next season. Maybe even give up a type of player like a Royce O'Neal, if that's what it means, or some type of young piece. So that's definitely what I could see with Jeremy Grant. So my prediction, my trade deadline prediction, number 1, Jeremy Grant goes to the Utah Jazz. Now, let's say if it's the Chicago Bulls. Maybe they're asking for Patrick Williams and 2 first. That's a fair trade, man. I mean, Patrick Williams is a really good player, but you're trying to win right now, and Jeremy Grant does that. Patrick Williams, yes, he does it, but he doesn't do it like Jeremy Grant does it. He's a veteran player with a lot more experience. He's gotten to the Western Conference Finals. He's a very elite player, and you could extend the guy and you'll lock him up for a couple more years in Chicago. No reason for that. No problems there. You make that deal. Now, the Lakers probably going to have to include Talen Horton-Tucker in that trade. That's pretty much about it. Talen Horton-Tucker is your biggest piece. You can maybe try to include Kendrick Nunn. Probably going to have to include a guy like DeAndre Jordan in there too, or Dwight Howard. I doubt Dwight Howard gets traded, just saying. But yeah, that's the only reason why I don't think the Lakers have any shot at this guy. But I wouldn't be surprised. Next player, Domontas Sabonis. This is definitely the biggest name in the trade deadline. The teams that I mentioned, Washington, Philly, Cleveland, and the Sacramento Kings. Recent reports coming out that actually the Washington Wizards have zeroed in on acquiring Domontas Sabonis. So definitely keep in mind Rui Hachimura could be on the move. Denny Avdija. You also have there Montrezl Harrell could get moved. So many guys on the Washington team that are movable this season. And that's just the name of the trade deadline. That's what you have to do. You have to move guys. And to get a player like Domontas Sabonis, you pair up with Bradley Beal. You could also pair him up with Spencer Dinwiddie. Just makes a lot of sense on that end. And just trade the young guys, make that final push for a playing spot, which is, I think, what they'll get at the end of the day. So, looking at the other teams, Philly was a team that you could probably move Ben Simmons over to Indiana. I know they've expressed some type of interest there. You maybe could do a 1-for-1 swap, but Daryl Morey's on something when he's making these trades or even offering them. So I doubt he goes to Philly. Cleveland just made the trade for Caris LeVert, so I see it unlikely that it happens, but if they do, they can make that trade. Try to trade away Kevin Love to Indiana. You can maybe even try to move a couple other guys. Dean Wade, a very good player that Indiana could use. It just depends how the cap constraints go. Maybe even Colin Sexton gets moved to Indiana. That would make a lot of sense for him. We pair him up with Malcolm Brogdon unless Brogdon gets traded. So there's a lot of moving pieces there. And then Sacramento, you could swap Marvin Bagley. De'Aaron Fox maybe goes to Indiana and helps them compete there. Who knows? But that's another big name. Moving on to the Indiana branch, here we have Myles Turner. The only 3 teams I've truly heard are Charlotte, LA, and Toronto. Best fit is easily Toronto or Charlotte. Now, which team is going to get him is the best question. I personally think that Toronto has the best ammunition. You could give up Goran Dragic, then Indiana just buys him out. You could also try to give up a guy like maybe they make a huge splash for Pascal, a 1-for-1. Doesn't make much sense on that end. But looking at Toronto's roster, there are definitely a couple movable pieces. Not much, but your biggest piece to move with, if it's Toronto, definitely Goran Dragic. You can move Chris Boucher as well. That would be another big piece to move in that trade if you go after a Myles Turner. Finally, Charlotte. Charlotte does have some movable pieces. I don't know if Kelly Oubre is considered one, but he's been very underrated and very good this season. So that's definitely I would like to keep. Besides that, you don't have much. You could move James Bouknight. That would probably be the biggest move if they make that trade. He hasn't played much. Makes sense to move the guy. So that's pretty much it on the Myles Turner. And in LA, you would have to move Talon Horton-Tucker, and then he goes to Indiana for Myles Turner. Moving on to another big name piece, a very expensive piece, in fact, Eric Gordon. I put Washington, LA, and Cleveland Cavaliers. I think he mainly goes probably to the Lakers. That would probably be Talon Horton-Tucker in exchange for Eric Gordon. That makes a lot of sense. You could do THT and maybe a second rounder for Eric Gordon. That's actually a very fair trade when you look at it. Talon Horton would be able to go and pretty much produce at the rate that he's supposed to, be used as much as he should be. Not with LA when you have LeBron, AD, Russell Westbrook, Dwight Howard, Carmelo Anthony, all those guys. You're getting pretty much just in there. You're not getting enough minutes. So that is a perfect trade there. So, yes, Eric Gordon to Lakers is my prediction number 3. And going to Myles Turner, I think he goes over to the Toronto Raptors. And with Domontas Sabonis, I think it goes to the Washington Wizards. Next player is Dorian Finney-Smith. This is probably the best defender in the trade market. I put the Pelicans, the Bucks, the Bulls, and the Heat. All teams that are pretty much contending or trying to make a big push. I've been hearing that some team offered the Mavericks a first rounder for Dorian Finney. They said no. So they're pretty much trying to keep this guy locked in. I would love the Miami Heat to acquire him, maybe do a Yurtseven or a Marquis Morris and a KZ Okpala trade for Dorian Finney. That would be probably trade deadline winning moves, and you make that defense a lot better. Brooklyn could be another outside team that I could see them making a move. But if I had to make a prediction right now, I believe that the team that will get him are the New Orleans Pelicans. Now, hear me out. This makes a lot of sense. They'll get a lot better defense. Offensively isn't the brightest or the best, but he's definitely going to time. He's probably the best defender out there. But if we're looking at a really contending team that can maybe get even Dante DiVincenzo, you have to look at Milwaukee. Milwaukee is another very good team that I could see them getting Dorian Finney, just for the simple fact that Dante DiVincenzo is a very movable piece in my eyes, at least. And it makes a lot of sense to make that trade. You're going to improve your defense a lot more than it is right now. You're not a top 3 seed. At the moment, Miami's number 1, Chicago's number 2, Cleveland's number 3. So it makes a lot of sense to make that kind of a trade. If I had to predict, Dorian Finney goes to the Pelicans. Christian Wood, that's another huge name in the deadline market. All these teams have shown interest. The Miami Heat one I could actually back up a lot. NBA Central on Twitter tweeted it out. The Charlotte Hornets, that would be a dynamic duo with LaMelo. Toronto, once again, Dragic is a very movable piece, so it makes a lot of sense. Then finally, you have the Milwaukee Bucks, who you can move Brook Lopez, you can move DiVincenzo. But if I had to make the prediction of who gets this guy, I think Charlotte gets him, man. If it's not Turner, it's definitely going to be this guy and Christian Wood, who makes a lot of sense. Move Bouknight, move whoever you have to get this player on your team. You can even move Mason Plumlee, who's on the team right now. So just some guys to consider there on the move. Jalen Brunson, he's been one of the biggest names on the market, one of the more expensive names when it comes to value you have to give away. Now, New Orleans makes a lot of sense here because you bring in a point guard. You could pair him up with Devontae Graham. Now, New York also makes sense. Your point guard situation has been horrid. Kemba Walker hasn't worked out. Alec Burks has actually been pretty good, but he's not really a point guard. He's more of a shooting guard / small forward. Clippers need point guard help as much as possible player to start over Reggie Jackson. And then finally, you have the Sacramento Kings, which I assume they could move De'Aaron Fox, and then you get Jalen Brunson as a replacement. So what team gets Jalen Brunson? I believe the team that will get Jalen Brunson are the New York Knicks. You could probably trade away Kemba Walker, a couple other pieces, maybe 1 or 2 guys for a guy like Jalen Brunson, especially veteran pieces. Fournier, I've heard, is very movable. So maybe you trade away Fournier, you put him in a team like Dallas Mavericks. Mavericks will stay winning, stay contending. And then Brunson, who is an impending free agent, goes to the Knicks and maybe tries to play it out there, see what happens. So that's another big move. Now, the next team, Indiana Pacers. The next team, yes, Buddy Hield is the next player on the market. Philly, New Orleans, the Knicks, and the Pacers. Now, you should be asking, why the Pacers? The Pacers only make sense if they make the trade for Domontas Sabonis, which I doubt. But next, you have the Knicks, who make a lot of sense for Buddy Hield. He could go out there and shoot the 3-point game. New Orleans, the team that originally drafted him. This could be a case where you trade De'Aaron Fox and Buddy Hield over there for some kind of big name. And then finally, you have the 76ers, which I think that's where he'll wind up. I don't know if it'll be for a Tobias Harris, which I've been hearing that teams have been calling, and that they've been willing to move on from him. And I could see Buddy Hield entering Philly easily, starting right away. Or you could even see Ben Simmons in New Orleans. I mean, Ben at the point guard, you have Devontae Graham at the shooting guard. At the small forward, you have Brandon Ingram, power forward, Zion, and your center is Jonas Valanciunas. That's a very scary lineup, so something there to keep in mind. Moving on, De'Aaron Fox, maybe the biggest star name on the deadline market in New Orleans, simply because they have the assets to make the trade, number one. Number two, he has family in New Orleans, so it'll make a lot of sense. And then that's pretty much about it. And by the way, yes, I do believe Buddy Hield goes to the Philadelphia 76ers. But going back to Fox, the Knicks make a lot of sense because it'll be a point guard that they'll have for the future. They don't have to worry about it. And then the Clippers, because they need a point guard, they do have the pieces to move. So where do I think De'Aaron Fox lands? I personally think he will be going to the New Orleans Pelicans if traded. Obviously, this is all if this player gets traded. I think he goes to the Pelicans. Now, moving on to a different situation before we move on to the final player on the deadline market, the Miami Heat. The Miami Heat have actually been pretty active in the market. Look at these players that the Heat have actually been interested in. Besides Christian Wood, we've seen P.J. Washington, who was former Kentucky teammates with Tyler Hero, Nick Batum, who would be a nice stretch 3 or 4 power forward or small forward, and then Rui Hachimura, which actually surprises me a bit, but let's think of it in the ways that these are all players that make sense to pair up with Bam Adebayo as a starter. Obviously, KZ Paula is going to get moved, in my opinion. The Heat are going to make a trade. I think they will. And KZ Paula is going to be the movable piece. But then you have Omer Yurtseven, who's actually been very nice and good. But I think they're going to keep going with Dwayne Dedmon. He's only 31, so still has at least 4 or 5 years left in the tank. You could also move Marquis Morris, who they've been it's been a weird situation. I hope he does play. But ever since the Jokic injury, he's cleared pretty much to go. The Heat haven't cleared him, but there's been some issues with that. And then Duncan Robinson, unfortunately, I think is the final piece that could get moved. I hope he doesn't, man, because usually this is the thing. Duncan Robinson they've discovered Duncan. That's pretty much the way you could look at it. They've discovered what Duncan Robinson's about. They know his little moving three-point shooting skills. They know about that stuff. So you have to think of it like that. Now, out of these 3 guys, which one do I want the most? I personally want P.J. Washington the most. Very good player. Nothing much to say. He's former Kentucky teammates. He could be good at power forward. And he's been actually one of the players I actually like a lot in the NBA. Rui Hachimura would be my second choice. Nick Batum was very impressive. Would be my third, but I don't think he'll play that much. Moving on to the final player, Harrison Barnes, cap constraints and how much money they're paying him, and he's a very movable piece. Boston makes the most sense. I personally think he goes to Boston, so that's pretty much about it. Harrison Barnes is a huge piece in the trade. He could go anywhere, honestly. Makes a lot of sense, but let's see if there's any trade deadline news. The latest trades have been obviously the Caris LeVert trade, which sent Ricky Rubio a first-round pick and a second over to Cleveland for Caris LeVert. So he will be now with the team. They're actually funny coincidence. They're going to play each other tonight. So we'll see if LeVert makes the debut. And Marvin Bagley, yes, the Kings want to trade him very badly. Ben Simmons saga, I'm not even going to get into that. It's just a stupid saga. The 76ers have dealt with that horrendously, in my opinion, but hopefully they make it up and get a nice player in the trade deadline. So that's about it, guys. Thank you guys for watching. Like and subscribe to the channel. I'll see you guys all in the next one. Hopefully, actually, NFL podcast is coming out. I want to do that once again. The Miami Dolphins made a nice move. We'll talk about that later and all the head coaches. See you guys all in the next one. Peace out, guys.